the Advent wreath burning for a little bit longer because I thought maybe we could chat a little bit about Advent specifically. Today, what I want to do is invite a little bit of feedback from you all. So we did a strange thing today. What do you... We did a strange thing, ma'am. Today, we did something that I don't know. Someone who's been here way longer than me can answer the question for me. Has a lay person ever officiated a service at St. David's? No? Good Lord. Please don't tell the... No. All right. So we did a very unusual thing in that for the first time ever here, a lay person officiated a service in the midst of Advent. What did you think about that? What was happening for you? And I'm not looking for your flattery. I'm looking for your feedback. What did you think? It was different. Tell me about different. I love that you think I have so much experience. Everyone, you heard it here first. I got a lot of experience. So what John shared is that, if I'm paraphrasing this right, that you knew it was different. You thought that it might not carry the same weight because, well, there wasn't a person with a collar speaking those words to you, or at least not most of them. And then you found that it still did carry some weight. What do you make of that? You're done now. You've given enough. You thought it wouldn't carry the weight, but it did. So what does that tell you about the words spoken versus who speaks them? Yeah. It's a really interesting thing. What else? Go ahead. It wasn't the same. Yeah, it wasn't the same. Yeah. So we're used to our daily acrobatics of stand, sit, kneel, and we didn't do that today. Why? What'd you make of it? I mean, I didn't tell you why, so you must have come to some conclusion while it was happening. Was less formal. Okay. Yeah, so it's a question of, do you really need all that structure? What changes when you take away? Yeah, you miss standing. Okay. You may have stood up once, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. 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 And has that been missing in some other service? Are we talking about today, or are we talking about... there's more to unpack because I'm not sure which ones you're referring to. Definitely today that wasn't there, but interestingly enough, there were still rubrics that told you, invited you to stand or kneel. And I found myself going, well, isn't that interesting? When the instruction is there for you to stand or kneel, everyone kept seated. With a few notable exceptions. But there were moments, particularly in the prayers of the people, was where I noticed that I thought it was really interesting. Yeah. I was curious, like you, I was curious what would happen. That could be, yeah. Yeah, well, good. Great. That's great. I couldn't see all the way back yet. I mean, like I said, there were notable exceptions, but for the most part, people were just sort of in place, and maybe that does say something about confusion, or distraction, or maybe something else. I mean, it is very interesting. Thanks for bringing it up, Lon. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thanks be to God, the book gives the option to do whichever one feels right for you. I mean, far be it for me to yell from the front. The book says kneel, Lon. I don't think John didn't say anything about sitting. Yeah. It seems weird because when you sing, if you're standing, your diaphragm's able to open more. Welcome to science class, everyone. Take a deep breath. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So is joyful singing not a possibility while being seated? It's interesting. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, Nikki. So there's a practical nature to some of the decisions that happen in church, and then as soon as you make a practical choice, then we got to build some theology around it, right? Why do we sit today? I don't have like a priestly answer for you. We could call the bishop and ask her, I suppose. I doubt she would know either. We sat today because everywhere I've ever done lessons and carols, you're seated. Because the normal flow of what happens in a regular Sunday service is by its nature thrown off. Right? We heard from multiple gospel readings today. You had a series of readings you would not normally hear. Some of them felt a little disjointed even, because that's what the book says, this is what happens. Mercifully for all of you, the prayer book says we should do 9 lessons and carols. I gave you 7. You're welcome. Or maybe you wanted all 9 and you wanted 9, right? That'd be okay too. There's a comment box somewhere, right? So why sit? Well, there's something that happens in sitting as well. There's a quieter nature to being seated. There's also a familiar nature to being seated. It's like sitting around your living room with family, reading and singing. That's what was told to me once upon a time by someone I think's pretty wise. And like most people, you hear something, you latch onto, and you go, I like that. I'll do that. And then you end up with a pair somewhere, and you realize you made a mistake. Good news is we got another shot at it. You get Christmas lessons and carols. We can stand there and talk about the difference. Yeah. Thanks for bringing it up, Melissa. Oh, yeah. Hmm. Sure. Yeah. Of course, yeah. The things we do with our bodies, it certainly affects our experience of liturgy. Yeah, Jim. Yeah. Yeah. I did that a couple of times today as well. Yeah, there's something about just being able to be in the space. I, I'll reveal a little bit behind the curtain for you all. I didn't do it because I thought it would just be a step too far, um, and maybe I already stepped too far. It's okay too. But I thought really hard about just sitting in the pew. I feel like somebody would have like gasped, like a teacup shattering on the floor or something like that. Yeah, but I thought about that for that same reason of sort of what's it like to just be in the space. And when the prayer book gives us services like this one that actually are not centered around Eucharist. They're centered around a story, telling stories and singing. I mean, it's like light the fire in the hearth. Pour some cocoa. It's just. And in the midst of Advent, where we're told to be expectant, I wonder, what was it like for you to have to negotiate what you were going to do about communion? It didn't escape my notice that not everyone came up to get communion from reserve. So I'm curious, what was that decision like for you? Is it, yeah, go ahead, Carrie. Yeah. Isn't that funny how that happens? Yeah. Isn't that funny how that happens where you're scooting past people and the formality of communion takes on a different space for you? One of these days, I really want to get T-shirts made. I saw one time that's in the bulletin. Right? Like, we give announcements, we print the rubric in the bulletin that tell you exactly what, but still, there's this disconnect. And so suddenly in these spaces, there's some onus back to lay people to lead themselves, lay people to figure out what they need to do. And also, I wonder how, when you have slightly less formal, which is still pretty formal. I was up here holding a piece of silver, right? It's still pretty formal, but suddenly you have to kind of negotiate what's happening for you without me going, here it is. Right? So, yeah. Oh, was that was Gabriel's message? Yeah. Yeah. So it's like a little bit. I mean, we could ask an organist. Can people sing along with anthems? I did. I did. I couldn't imagine making it through Advent with singing "Most High and Favored Lady." Like, oh my God. Yeah. 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 Well, so it sounds like it's been a pretty disjointed service for you all. Yeah. Yeah. Having. Yeah. So that's really great. So you're saying you to a more Protestant Episcopal church which prays morning prayer and or so Sunday prayer, whereas we do that every Sunday. And so with experience, I'm more about how communion, our reserved sacrament, gets confusing here, because I would hear that and go like, oh, well, if I had, my initial thought was no communion, but I wonder how that would feel. We did reserve today because St. David's is very accustomed to communion. As a priest, if you're praying morning prayer, I wouldn't shudder at that. I wouldn't feel like anything was necessarily missing. If anything, it might have in the season of Advent created that little bit of space for me to experience expectation in a new way of sort of waiting for the next Sunday. I don't know. John? Okay. So it seemed like the moment passed and you can't imagine without communion. Yeah. So sometimes when you travel, you find churches that say, yeah, we don't do communion this week, and that's just joining. Yeah. So communion's very important. You need to have it every week because without it, something's missing. Can I pick on you for a second? But today you didn't take communion, even though without communion something's missing. So what happened when that moment felt like it was past and you went, yeah. So today without it. Yeah. Okay. So it's like it's a one-off. It's fine. I'll pick it up next week. Yeah. 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 So the moment passed, even though communion's very important, but next week. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So sometimes this is really the only point, right? Like, sit with your discomfort today. It's okay. You can be disappointed with me too. That's all right. I'm thoroughly disappointing, right? But also take that moment to go like, what is it that's happening to me because of this service? What was missing? Why? What did I do? What did I not do? When did I remember? Because there's something holy in that. So, yeah, great questions. There's actually a lot on, and there are a few things happening in your question. I want to pull them. You ask about was it part of the fact that there wasn't a consecration happening, or was it that the sacrament you wanted more for the sacrament, or was it a little tagged on? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Huh. Oh Lord. Yeah. I think you've got something to add to that. Come on. Yeah. 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 Mm. Mm. Yeah. And for you, I don't look back through years past, at least in the printed form, I didn't readily find the bidding prayer, that first prayer that he led us to of God. Right? That's from a book called the Book of Occasional Services. There's another one for Christmas lessons and carols that you'll hear. But that story tells you the setting. And Debbie, you hit the nail right on the head. The whole service is about worship. And it's right at the beginning. We hear the story of God's love through time. You don't need to confess anything to hear that story. You don't need to be made more whole to let that sink into your soul. Today is the moment for you to go, oh yeah, God loves me. And the only thing we did do corporately together was pray the Lord's Prayer, just to remember that that's the way God wants us to think about the world in this moment. Now, from a technical standpoint, just for clarity, because I have to, reserved sacrament is consecrated already. There's nothing to do. In some churches, and particularly in the sort of what we kind of call the high Anglo-Catholic churches, they'll bring out their reserve, they'll put it down, they'll say some other prayer that they made up. There is no prayer. The prayer has already been said. Right? The only we'll find in your prayer book around communion is a prayer called the prayer for spiritual communion. And that is a prayer designed for when you didn't get communion. Only the priest got communion. Right? We're just up there, gobble, 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 and then, Lord, we pray for this spiritual communion that we've received, right? Which is so weird. COVID was the first time that prayer dusted off in decades, right? But it's interesting, just from our theology, you have a Eucharistic, ordinary things are holy, and we put them wherever we store them, and thank God, beautiful place to put them and hold them. That red candle burns every time there's something holy in that space. If you go into the chapel, you'll find that candle is not burning because there's nothing in the tabernacle. It's all right there. So when I go to that tabernacle and remove holy elements, or when an altar guild member goes and removes elements and brings them out, they are right there. They're done. The candles were lit already because it's holy. Everything is there. So I wonder, for me, it says a certain thing. I don't know what it says for you, but I wonder about how that service could be inviting you to see holy things that are in your midst without someone like me going, holy. Everyone look at the holy things. We just put it out there. And that is sacrament. It's already sacred. So it feels disjointed, maybe. But I also wondered about how that relates to your walk in the world, which when you think about the liturgy, how we move in this space, we're always talking about how we stand, sit, kneel, where we walk, what we recognize. So even if you got to elbow out of the way who are chit-chatting to go, that feels like real life. I could make the argument that that's more real than I'm a priest for asking. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Hear that. I believe you. Yeah, I believe you too. And I think that you are right. I mean, there's going in a space like this, it's a sacred and delicate honor to lead God's people in worship. Right? But I ain't special. My dad told me one time, kind of, that is part of the priesthood. You ever stop and think about how reckless it is for any of us to be ordained, to stand and make ordinary things holy? It's really reckless. It's been reckless forever. When you think about Old Testament readings who became the priests, one of the most important things for the priest in the tent of worship was that they had a rope fastened firmly on their waist. We have representations of that we've added even more and more theology on. I don't wear one, but a cincture, right? That long tail on it, because the story was that if that priest wasn't properly prepared to enter the Holy of Holies, that they would, in the sight of God's holiness, drop dead. And after a certain amount of time, folks on the outside would give that rope a good pull and see if they needed to drag their body out. We created a whole story about that. How many priests died? I don't know, you'd have to tell me. I'm going to guess none, right? But it was important to think about that, and that story throughout our theological history has relevance still today. Today, it is reckless for any human, me, to stand at a table, proclaim these prayers, because I am not doing special. I am speaking words that we all carry in our souls. And the priesthood today is of spiritual scapegoating. It always, I mean, it takes some of us that are called in that way to say, yes, I will stand in on behalf of all of us to proclaim the truth that we know, to tell you that these things that are ordinary, broken, are holy, and to remind you that your interaction with them makes you holy. Same liturgy, I've already reminded you that before you did anything, you were forgiven, you were set free, that you were enough, that everything happening here is meant to send you away from this space. So I'm not doing anything special. And as Episcopalians, we do believe that the elements on the altar have become literal body and blood. There is space for you to interact with that if that's part of your spirituality. We speak about it in terms of remembrance, right? We don't believe that these things become something totally different. We had a moment where that was our theology. That's been a lot of moons ago. So we have come a very long way to get to this place. So, yeah, I did a lot of extra stuff. The real holiness happens out here, not up there. And if anything, it's something, for me, it's always something about the way I treat those things, which becomes a reminder for all of you to think about how you treat things in the world and how you determine what broken bits become holy. Because as a biblical scholar told me, he was one of my most challenging professors. He wrote almost all of the books on New Testament. He said, if what we have on a Sunday is a feast, a foretelling of a feast in God's heavenly kingdom, is not much of a feast. Think about that. That's heretical. But think about that. If you come up and the example of your feast is this one tiny piece of stale host and one tiny sip of a wine that you would never buy for yourself, it's not much. What he was saying is not to break apart what we believe as Eucharist. What he was inviting for our class to think about, and why I'm telling you now this heretical thing, is to stop and think about how you interact with the thing, not what the thing is. So somehow, all of a sudden, if I can cherish a stale, broken piece of cracker and I can cherish the most disgusting port you've ever had in your life, well, then I can cherish things that mean even more. I can cherish my children and my family. I can cherish my job. I can cherish my clothes that allow me to be clothed fully in the winter. My bed that a lot of people don't have. I get to see holy and all sorts of things that seem pretty meager. That may just muddy the water for you, but sorry. So very, very different theology. Yeah. Yeah, so you're talking about the theories transubstantiation, which is where these things are transformed into something totally different, versus consubstantiation, which is where they are two things at one time, are not, right? When did that change? It changed around what's known as Vatican II. There was a big council. This was the same time that a lot of work was done on what we read in the church, the Revised Common Lectionary. The church was very much a part of that because really dangerous and time where suddenly all of these mainline churches were going, we really want to be a little bit more similar. See that we're pretty close to each other, so we want to work this stuff out. And lots of folks, matter of fact, they met in a room where I had a great number of classes at Yale, the Revised Common Lectionary. All these white men gathered and lit their cigarettes, sat around the table, and they wrote the lectionary. And everyone was going to do it. And then the Catholics changed their mind. But the rest of us held on, and we said, no, there's something really to this. And the result is, what we see in our lectionary and what we do in our churches became more and more similar to what you see reflected in the Roman church. If anything, our liturgies got a little bit fussier, and theirs got a little bit like, you know. But the theory of what communion means, what Eucharist is, well, yeah, that's something where we're kind of a world apart. I can't make any more sense of it other than to give you even more questions, which is, what do you need in that? The human question, what difference does it make? And I can answer that for me, but I can't answer that for the rest of you. I want you to... responding on behalf of the Roman Catholics. Sure. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're like, yeah, you're a, yeah, 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 yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah, and a lot of other churches, mainline and Catholic, they do offer lessons in carols. Advent is one of the ones that sometimes people leave out because there's this terrible lie that's floated around that the Advent hymns are too sad. Right? And I would make the argument for you that, well, Advent's a little sad. Like I can't make it happier. I don't think anyone wanted it to be. And so often those churches do these as additional things, which is the liturgical way of going, if you don't come, that's okay. And I really believe that these sort of, well, you've heard me say this in lots of different ways, but I just love how strange and weird church is. And I want to do all those strange things, and I want to do them right here as our principal service, because I want to point to the beauty in the human nature of these things. And so when you think about even the readings today, you're right. It starts all the way at Adam and Eve, a slightly problematic telling of that story, but nevertheless, it's there. We're talking about original sin, which we still aren't quite sure about today. And then we pull it all the way through the birth of Jesus. Thank God these women that were so put down didn't give up on us. They kept coming along. And then we end with the gospel reading of the day, which still to me feels just like, what? Jesus is born, and then there's this crazy guy proclaiming things in the wilderness. And it's this moment of, wait a minute, was John the Baptist the one we were talking about? Was Jesus? What happened? For me, there's this thread that's pulled all the way through this miraculous moment that we've waited for, that we're still waiting for. We keep lighting candles for it. And then suddenly we move right past it to say, there is a crazy person proclaiming these things in the world. My friends, we are the crazy people proclaiming this in the world. We get to own that today. We get to feel our connection to a story that never ended. And I think that's way more interesting than me putting a period at the end of the sentence for you. You just get to stay in that. Sure? Yeah. 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 Yeah, so you like the fact that I sort of stepped aside. I would take that a little bit further for you. So lots of clergy people that have been doing this way longer than me have echoed a similar sentence, so I'll tell it to you all. When a priest stays at a parish for a certain amount of time, we start to become pretty convinced that we are Jesus, and then you all tell us that we are, so we believe it. You all will be in this church faithfully worshiping and serving God long after I am not even a memory. And long after your next rector is not a memory. It's interesting to see those moments where I do things like this, and I sure hope your next rector does this stuff too. I mean, for me, that's the biggest sign of humility and trust that I can show you as a priest. The best thing I can do as a priest is to make myself redundant at best. You don't need me to do every single thing, and it's important for you to see that you, as part of God's priesthood, have those gifts already in the midst of you. In the Church of England, there are lay people that are ordained for specific purposes in specific churches, to say the Eucharistic prayer, to preach. You don't have priests doing that, and the people still get it done. In the original formation of the Episcopal Church, even in this country, a priest wouldn't have been something that belonged to a parish. I mean, that's a really modern thing. That happened in the late 1940s through the 1950s, where suddenly churches were calling their own rector. Priests were priests, and they worked in the diocese. And parishes functioned as part of their cure, but someone like me would have been making a rotation through 4, 5, 6, 8 parishes. You might have seen me once every other month. And in between, you would have prayed morning prayer. And a layperson would have led you. There wouldn't have been confession. There would have been, but it wouldn't have been an absolution to that. You would have together prayed that prayer, and together you would have said, God, forgive us, have mercy on us. But you wouldn't have had a priest going, Lord, have mercy on you, forgive you all your sins. Right? So there's something about this that for me is important for me to go, you have it. You can do it. Me too. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. No. Yeah. 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 It's all those things, a little column A, a little column B. But Lori, I love what you said of it's these synods and councils that added all this complication. That's the correct way of saying what I said earlier. I'm not special. I'm just complicated. You know, I'm part of the system. Right? Every priest is part of our call, part of our order when we are ordained a priest. We even sign paperwork for it. If you've never seen a priest get ordained, it's delicious. We sign paperwork and we proclaim in front of everyone that we believe that everything that's needed for salvation is in the Bible and that we will defend that faith. And we will submit ourselves to the rule of our bishop, even if we disagree, even if we've never spoken. We're not inventing anything interesting. We're part of it. We're part of the system. We're part of the thing that keeps us locked into some of these cycles that might distract from what we're really here for. And so when these services invite us to just ask the question, why am I here? It's an interesting interaction. Melissa. Huh. That's so. I'm just what I want to say is, why? More about it. It's so, but it's so. I love that you can say out loud, "This is the first time it's meant something to me," and I think all of us need to hear that. On a level, I can't believe I'm going to say this. I can't believe I'm going to say it. This is the first time it meant anything to me. As a priest, Lessons and Carols historically has been one of those services that I go, you just got to stay focused long enough to remember that you have a prayer to say when that hymn is over, when that reading is over. You're counting backward to go, stay focused, because there's no homily. There's no preparation other than my own prayer to be there, and it's generally longer, at least in the way that my brain works. I have like a little bit of ADHD, so there's a lot of space in this service for my mind to just totally wander and to end up in unexpected places. And in the past, for me, it's been a little bit of a struggle that I finish the service and then I'm like hungry for something. I don't even know what. I go home and watch other people's church services, trying to get connected to something that I thought I missed, but I don't know. I never really interrogated it much. So for the first time, this service meant something more to me. And I think it was getting to see Nikki do what she was doing, really listening and participating with music, because as an officiant, we are actively in your service. But I'm working. And I'm singing along with you, but I'm also trying to remember what's the point in the verse where I need to stop singing and I need to unmute my microphone and I need to make sure the camera's in the right place, and then I need to make sure that I'm ready for that prayer. And I need to look at it, read the first few sentences so that I make sure that when the music stops, I can just sort of just flow into it so that you all can just let that kind of wash over you, right? So for the first time, I didn't have to do that. It was really a gift to me. I don't know what that means, but I know I'll think more about it today. What else? I can't tell you guys. You either look ready to go, slightly shocked. I probably said too much. Happens at least once a day. Yeah. Yeah. So, so God didn't create religion. Man did. God did create worship, though. And that's something we did today. There's so much to unpack in that. You sort of bomb sort of right at the end of a therapy session where your therapist says, and that's all the time we have today, and you go, just one more thing I wanted to tell you, right? All right, yeah. It is something really deep for us to consider, though. What are the parts of worship that we create? What are the parts of our community together, our life together, that we say, this must and this mustn't? Like, this is and this is not. It doesn't matter really where you land. Any church can land in any place and go, this is the way we express our faith in community. What matters, as you've heard me say over and over again, is how you get there, how you articulate your faith. And as I can tell you, and I believe it's safe for me to speak on behalf of all ordained people, whenever your answer is, because it's always been done, I'm not listening to you. Even by the time you get to the end of that sentence, I don't care where you will end. It will be infinitely boring to me. Because we have always, thus and such, and then suddenly I just hear you in my mind, whoa, 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 whoa. Right? But when you start that conversation with, here's something that is really important to me, which is how we began this conversation today, by the way. When we're sorting out what happens with Eucharist from reserve, or if we say the prayer, what's really important to me. That's where I want you all to stay. What mattered? Where'd you feel uncomfortable? What did you feel? You know, was it that anger that made your left eye twitch a little bit? Was it a feeling of sadness at a loss of something? And to just keep digging into that. I mean, you didn't get my homily for Advent 2 today. You got a little bit of it here. But, I mean, that's what's happening right here, folks. Every Sunday, things get a little brighter, a little bit clearer. Each one of those flames represents something new for you to consider, and also for you to consider all of the space around it. It only does so much work for you. And there's an eternal truth in that. Of old, there wouldn't be lights in this place. It'd only be that candle. Imagine reading your stuff just from the light of one candle, and then two, and then three, while you thought about hope, faith, and next week joy. Each of these things matters a great deal because they invite you to think about why it matters to you. Or be it for me to tell you why it should matter. A really good friend of mine, I forget who I told this to the other day, invited Joel and I to dinner. And this person is agnostic and I've said here before and proudly that some of the most interesting conversations I've ever had are with agnostics. They really stop me in my tracks. It's fascinating. And this person said, I just don't understand church. And I said, you'll have to tell me more. That's a little broad. And they stuck on the sermon. That's the thing they didn't understand. The rest of this made perfect sense. They didn't get the sermon, though, because they don't know why anyone would come into a building and sit for an hour to hear wisdom given to them without them asking for it from one person. I got nothing for that. I told him it was a pretty good point. I never thought about that. So this question about Eucharist, about who's leading service, about whether or not there's a homily, about all of these are great moments for you to stop and wonder the same question. Why would someone come and do that? Why would someone be upset if it were missing or not? What's missing for me? This is, to me, the bread and butter of Advent. It is an uncertain, unsteady time for the life of a church to just sit with that, to not move forward, to not jump to the happy hymns, and just to sit and think about what you're noticing. New things like that wreath draw your attention. What do you see when you look? And maybe what do you notice is missing? Like always, you've proven again today that there is nothing that you can't talk about. And I sure hope, at least on most levels, that I'm showing you, and there are no priest that you need to be fearful of. We are in the mess with you. We are making sense of a whole life with you. And we only stand in front of you because you asked us to. Closing thoughts. Anything else you want to think through in the 3 minutes we have left? Hmm? Yeah. 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 There's an eternal truth in what you're sharing about what it means to have a lay-led anything, Jim. And you're talking in the context of this youth chapel. But I can tell you one of the, I used to give some really terrible sermons. Y'all have no idea. Really terrible. And they were long. And they were so, I would spend 8, 10, 12 hours a week writing them and perfecting them. And then on Saturday evening, I'd come into the church that I served, and I'd get up in the pulpit, and I'd say the sermon over and over again to an empty room. And I'd perfect that, like, where's my voice going to go up? And where am I going to get real quiet? And how am I going to move? And it was terrible. Terrible. Right? And then I worked at another church, and I gave one of those terrible sermons. And the priest, who I still have a little bit of a thing with, came up to me and took my notes, my manuscript, and really dramatically, they were a dramatic priest, wadded them up in their hand and said, "You will never use a manuscript in my church again, and you can never preach from a pulpit as long as I'm here. I never did.